All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Lindsay, and you've tuned into our AI in Focus series, a series from Thoughtbot about getting started with AI to drive real business impact. And this is our third session. If you haven't been able to join our first few sessions, in session one, we talked about some common myths that kind of hold back teams from being successful on their AI initiatives. In session two, we talked about how to evaluate if AI is a good fit for your product and a good fit for the problem you're trying to solve, more importantly. And today we're kind of rounding out what we're calling our strategic foundations portion of the series with talking about the human role of AI and how to manage AI after you launch it. Turns out you still have to manage it after you launch it. So we'll talk about that. And last time we had everyone did their little intro and gave a kind of recap to help us keep track of some of the highlights from the previous sessions, which I thought was fun. So we're going to do that again. So everyone in our roundtable, can you tell us who you are? And then one big takeaway from last week about evaluating if AI is a good fit for your product. Starting in the hot seat today, Elena.
Ooh. Hi, I'm Elena Natario. I'm a design team lead at Thoughtbot. One of the areas that we talked about before is like how to decide if AI is a good fit for your products through like user interviews to really understand like if it's like the best possible solution for like a user's problem and their expectations. And so I'm looking forward to like talking a little bit more about that and like what implementation might be like. So yeah, over to you, Dawn.
Hi, I'm Dawn Dillette. I am a director of design strategy here at Thoughtbot. I guess building on what Elena said, we talked a lot about users, humans, user experience, things like that in our last session. In particular, sort of talking about building an understanding around your users' comfortability and familiarity with AI, what other kind of AI tools they're currently using, how much they might trust an AI feature or solution to come in and maybe take over like a portion of their workflow. So really just getting to know users and customers from that perspective and making sure that that's going into that's being considered in product decisions and user experience decisions that you're making. What about you, Fer?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Fernando Perales, development team lead at Thoughtbot. Last week, one of the things I discussed was about evaluating your technical options. Don't just go directly through to AI as the default solution for everything, but you should also compare them to other existing technical solutions that might be easier to implement or even cheaper to implement and manage.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for the recap. That was the rapid lightning fire recap of last week, but you can also watch the full recording if you want. But today, I think one of the themes we're obviously hearing from all of you is, one of the things that keeps coming up is the people that are involved, the real life human beings involved in the AI project, whether it was talking to the end user or talking about who's actually implementing the solution. And so Fer, going back to you, I know last time you talked about, you called out comparing AI solutions to even having humans continue to do a particular task. What is the role of people in the success of an AI project after it launches? And I think one thing I'm curious about is there's kind of like a mindset that maybe you set up AI in your product and then you just let it run, and it kind of goes off and does its thing. Is that a misconception? Are there instances where you might set up AI or machine learning and then let it run, or is there always human oversight and involvement required?
Yeah, good question, Lindsay. I think it's very optimistic to say that, yeah, you're going to implement this and no human will interact ever again. That's definitely not the case. But I think the main answer or the main thing that we want to know when we're suggesting an AI solution is if we want to replace the human work with an AI solution, it's really how much supervision or how long it's going to take for this solution to be as good as the human. That's probably a better question because I don't think it's going to happen, or at least for most of the systems, I don't think it will be the case that okay, no one will be supervising this again. And that reminds me of something that I watched like probably last week or this week. I don't remember that. There's a video when a driver goes through a drive-through and there's like a automated system. I don't know the specifics, but there's like an AI voice like, hey, what can I do for you? And he asks like, I want 1,000 cups of water. And then there's like a long pause and then a human intervenes like, hey, what can I do for you? And that's one of example because probably like, yeah, that's a valid request. Those are free, so in theory we can serve those, but definitely I don't think it's a good idea for a machine just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do that because it's definitely something malicious in this case. So that's why we need intervention. Sometimes it's not like a malicious interaction with the system. Sometimes it's okay, we're classifying documents and the system it's reaches like a good level of independency, but what about when we introduce a new kind of document that it has never seen before? We need to double check that. The same way that when you are using Copilot to get your code, you should check the code and not just trust on that code completely. So, yep, the human supervision is still a thing, but I think it's interesting to know. Okay, maybe we probably need like intensive supervision for the first couple of months, couple of weeks, and then eventually, okay, the system relies less and less on a human to do this supervision. Um, so yep, to answer your question, I think it's usually it's very optimistic to think that it's gonna happen on the first try.
I think I saw that exact video that you're talking about on my TikTok feed. It was like so funny to watch the computer just like pause for a second and then a human come in and be like, do you actually want 1,000 cups of water?
Yeah, because the machine was not able to probably identify that was
To
something like,
process
yeah,
that request of like, what do you mean? I didn't
exactly.
expect that answer.
Hmm.
But I think that also that just factors into like I think like when you're building like a product like that requires some kind of like input from your user, and then you're getting a request that you don't expect, and you're having the AI or computer or whatever processes you would put in place that don't involve a human, and they get that request and they don't know how to handle it. Then what happens? What are the contingency plans there? Are you going to process it in a different way? Are you going to involve a human? I think those are like all questions that like you might not think about going into it of like, and I think that also comes down to like user just behavior in general of like there are so many different ways that like when you're talking about end users, they might be using your features and your product in a totally unexpected way, in a different way that you just didn't really imagine. And you don't really find out those answers until you implement it and you see what happens. It's always an experiment, which is really fun. But I think that comes down to like, when we talk about like human interaction or intervention in a lot of these processes, we're talking about product management here. Like that's sort of like the main idea that we're sort of walking around here. It's also like I think like one of the risks that we often seek to mitigate when implementing a workflow previously done by humans is like output quality. Is like, is the data that's coming out of this, is it what I expect? Is it the same? Is it better? Is it something that's valuable? And so is this process doing its intended job is the question that I'm asking. And so like oftentimes that might look like a person that may have like previously done that work manually as an overseer, as a person that is doing sort of QA here. Is like, is the data that's coming out of this, is this what I would expect? And so like while the main point of this is, to validate that like over time this process might not be done with that oversight, like humans can also be like a part of flagging, even if more more optimizations and more opportunities. Like for example, like oh, I noticed like the output was confusing, like X data point and Y data point. And, like here are some ways that I think that we might be able to like better discern these data points so our AI can work more efficiently. Like maybe like I might be like prompting the AI in different ways because I'm noticing some like confusion here. So like or like maybe like we should test whether or not we actually need these data points to create this type of information because our users is like are not using us in the ways that I expected. So I think that like there's like a lot of nuance that human oversight can bring that AI computers and computers like in general like lack at this point, or like they don't bring the nuance that we would expect, or like nuance in like the ways that like we need to because we haven't engineered its logic in that way.
That, yeah, reminds me of, I think, a topic that we talked about in previous sessions too, around a lot of great AI use cases right now anyway, are around like human enablement rather than like human replacement. So like can the, task that they're helping speed up or automate actually free that person up to maybe do more complex human needed work, versus, oh, I'm launching this and that, and then getting rid of that person. And you talked about a bit about product management. And I know people are thinking, if they're launching a new project, around, and we're telling them, you're going to need people involved. What does that actually look like? And Don, maybe I'll ask you, what does that actually look like from a team perspective? What are the roles that should be involved, and what are they doing with the AI project?
Yeah, I love this question. This is like one of my tiny hills I'll die on. I just think it's so important that, the three perspectives that we keep sort of talking through in all of these sessions are at the table when you're making product decisions. It could be AI or, any kind of product and business decision in software. Including a product strategist or product manager, a designer, someone who can apply that design thinking and user perspective, and an engineer who, is the right fit from a technology perspective. I think a really important role, no matter what stage you're at, with a new product or an existing product when you're introducing AI, is to have someone in some sort of product ownership capacity that's keeping an eye on the rapidly evolving changes both in the market and in the industry, from a technical perspective, like how the technology is evolving and expanding, and how that changes its capabilities and what can be done, and the tools that are available that are utilizing AI. All of those things need to be considered, from a product perspective. There are a bunch of regulatory changes that happen from a sort of state or even government perspective, like especially if you're working within healthcare, or something that requires a bit more around security or personal information, things like that. Those things are changing all the time. And so having a view into that and how it will impact the product decisions you're making is important. And of course, like another tiny hill we'll die on is like always involving the customers, always, doing that continuous customer discovery to make sure the assumptions that we have and the solutions that we come up with, in AI or in our product are actually like serving a purpose or adding value or solving a problem. with our customers, and a constant like ear on those things. All of those things from a market, industry, and customer perspective are only going to help that product team trifecta that I keep talking about work better, work more efficiently, and build software that's impactful and helpful to people.
Yeah, and on the technical side, I mean, I like what you mentioned about like regulations, because it's all. I'm also concerned about that when thinking about the implementation, and the most obvious responsibility for the technical part of a project. It's obviously the choice of the tool and keeping up with the changes, because definitely it's like a fast evolving area. We have new models every couple of months that are way better than the previous one, or maybe that they're more precise to our needs. So we need to keep up with that. But also, as I mentioned, the regulatory parts, or the laws involving the use of AI. If we're launching like a global product, we have to keep an eye on what's going on in each country. And then is there any relation that might require us to disclose that what is the data that we're providing to an AI system? Can we do that? Also, as a company, it is even ethical for us to use these systems or to provide this information to this third party system. Is there any acquisition that might change the things that as we're doing right now? Definitely, there are a lot of things more than just calling APIs and getting the result. You definitely need the technical team to stay on top of those on those changes and know how they are going to impact your application and your users.
Yeah, I think like obviously it goes to say with any technology, but the rapid evolution we're seeing of AI tools right now, it's like almost day to day keeping up with what are the changes and how does this impact our implementation? Do we want to make any changes and things like that? If anyone has a question for our panel, feel free to ask. I have one here for the group. I've seen so many AI projects launch and then fizzle out because of a lack of human oversight. How might you convince your leadership team that a project needs more hands-on support, or the perils of not doing that? Anyone want to take it?
I can take that one, because it's usually the technical part that requires more maintenance. Besides the point and changes that I already mentioned in the last point, it's still a software product, so it still needs some maintenance. So I understand why some projects die, like just neglecting the maintenance part. But that's not only AI exclusive. It's pretty much anything that doesn't change, it's eventually gonna die. It's pretty much like if you build a page in the 90s and the page is still the same and looks the same. It's like, oh, that looks outdated. Maybe it's not useful. Maybe it's using patterns that are not really what most people is using. So that needs to change. And it's probably the same for AI. That could be one way to present this to product owners, just like this thing needs to evolve, and we need to have some bandwidth to be able to react to those changes that we want to implement in the future, even though we don't know what those changes are going to be.
And if I can build on that a little bit, going back to what I was just talking about, like the reason why it's so important to be tuned into your customers or your users is because they're going to generate like that need for continuing to work on a product or iterate on it so that it can remain valuable to them. Like that's sort of what you're looking for from a product market fit perspective. Like if you don't have that, that's when products become stale because they're not you're not sort of acquiring new customers if this is like a consumer focused product, or you're not sort of building enough value for them to keep using it and replacing their, whatever workflows and asking for more and giving you input, like that's when you know that you've sort of hit a nerve with the people that you're serving with this product. And, like Fer said, it's across the board. You're talking about software. It's not necessarily AI versus something else. So it's still true for AI, but I think like, all those other considerations come into play too. You're both needing to make sure that you're adding enough value that your customers keep wanting, or your users keep wanting more from this product, while also making sure that you're keeping up with all of the regulatory changes or the, the ways that the technology is changing or becoming outdated. So talk to your customers.
I think there's even a case for even so like say it's like just like this small feature, just like a page that, you know, this is very I feel like this is rare, but like doesn't need to change as far as like the user experience goes. Like it's remained the same. Like I here's an example, Craigslist. When has that changed? It's still very useful for a lot of people. But I think like the the crux of that is like promotion of like continuing to get an influx of users, of people using this on a regular basis, continuing to look at that data, continuing to react to that data, whether that's changing the user experience or changing like what your success criteria is, or like how you're working to get more people to use, your product, whether that's like internal tool or an external tool, making sure that essentially you're not reaching a status of it just sort of like collecting dust and just it's being there for the sake of being there, that it is providing value even if you're not changing it, that it's still continuing to provide that value, and you're continually checking in on it. You have someone on your team dedicated to looking into your products, even if it's like a little feature that they're sort of dedicated and responsible for noting, like, is this still meeting the success criteria that we're set up? Do we need to adjust that success criteria? Like, what are we looking at as far as like what makes this piece valuable to our users?
Another, I think, theme we've seen through our conversations, which is treat your AI project is like all your software projects, and a lot of the guidance we have is around any great successful software project. And part of that is, continuing to check in with your users. It reminds me of one of the recent AI projects we've worked on with a client, which was a really interesting and I think common use case where they do healthcare marketing as like an agency, and they have vast amounts of market research that they use to inform the marketing campaigns that they do for their clients. But like tons of information to wade through and analyze and kind of pull out insights, time consuming. So they thought, oh, this could be, a great use case for AI, and brought us on to help explore with that and launch something. So for internal workflow, internal users, and the main user group, maybe this is why I remember it so well, with marketers like myself. So less, technical savvy and the inner workings of AI. A lot of them weren't using ChatGPT, so weren't familiar with like the prompt experience. And that like really came out in the initial like user interviews and testing, was they didn't really know how to put together prompts that would get them back the information they needed to do the campaigns. And that ended up being like a big part of the design effort on our side, was making like a really user-friendly prompt experience, having like pre-made kind of like templates they could use to put in what they were looking for, and they kind of like more fill in the blanks and things like that. And it's been really interesting to see that be a success for them. how can teams continue to focus on the user experience and improving the product after its launch? I know we just started kind of getting into that a bit, but like, why is that important? And yeah, also I think, yeah, the topic of making the case internally why this is worth continuing to invest in.
I think that's such a good question. I also, so just to reframe, I think you said this earlier, but like this just all gets back to the position that we've been drumming on this entire series is like it's just AI, it's a means to an end, it's a feature, it's a part of your product, and so you should continue to treat that as such. And so all products can benefit from user testing. Like it's so important to see how like exactly how folks are using your product or features in your product because your findings might totally upend your assumptions. And I think the example that you just gave really proves that point of how would the team know what kinds of support users needed with when inputting information into ChatGPT without talking to them first, without gathering that information in some way. And so I think this also touches on iterative improvements to your product of like you can start with a baseline user experience, like perhaps one that incorporates AI prompts. And then after talking to the users, you might adjust, you might pivot a little bit and change how, in this example, how AI interacts with the user. And you can do this incrementally to easily like build on the success and like remove out the parts that aren't working. Sometimes it's hard to do like later on after you've built up like this like whole system and then you find out like a big chunk of it that like you were sort of relying on as a main user experience is actually not the solution. And so sort of building iteratively and like little by little is usually the point of where we see like the most success with products of like, okay, like this is works, this isn't working. Okay. And now I can kind of like, really drive my path forward. I also want to note that like when I say user, like it can be like internal. I'm not always talking about like external people out in the world. Sometimes it's internal folks, like on directly on a client team. So for my team, like I'm actually often working on tools for internal teams, and so the users I'm talking to are actually very close to the product itself. And so that said, there's often like I think we find like there's like wide gaps of knowledge and process understanding between perhaps like a person who's implementing something manually and they're part of that team that's doing that process that we're trying to like maybe replace or adjust or improve versus like maybe like a stakeholder or a C-level person who has like sort of like a wide breadth of knowledge of the entire system as a whole and like the goals, but they might not know like the nuances of the day to day of like what that process entails. And so like the former has that institutional knowledge, and that's kind of like the nuggets that I'm always interested in pulling out, because they might have their workarounds for the friction points. They might know some of what those friction points entail that like might not be documented anywhere, because they're part of their workflows. Think like everyone has things that speed up their own workflows and their processes that they're not necessarily telling other people because it's just it's just the way that they work. But they are very interesting if they're part of like like how might we improve this, and there might be like little nuggets that we can pull from that to inform those decisions. So I think it's important to bridge those knowledge gaps so we're not developing team tools that don't address real problems that people face. And so user interviewing, just do it. That's my whole spiel there.
And if I could add again another point, which I think is sort of ties everything that you all have just talked about together. I think the other important aspect of that is you have to speak the language of the business stakeholders, and you have to make sure there's a really good through line from whatever it is that you're advocating for. Let's say it's introducing this new AI technology, or advocating for some like process optimization for an internal team. If you're sort of able to translate that into success metrics that business stakeholders can look at and see like this is making an impact, this is generating revenue, this is like moving us forward in our, higher level strategy, like whatever it is, make sure that you're able to have that be a part of the conversation too, because that's what, we want to build great things. We want to have a great user experience, but that's all sort of tied to the fact that this is a product and it's a business. And so those two things have to work together. And going back to what I was talking about with the product market fit, like, that's going to be so obvious to business stakeholders when people are wanting more and more of your product, that's what helps the product teams, the developers and the designers sort of, need to keep contributing and iterating, and that the product or that feature doesn't become stale because it's in such high demand and it's such high value that it's sort of apparent to everybody, both from a user side, user, consumer. I also have trouble like distinguishing between internal and external people when I'm talking about it, and business stakeholders. So
Great points. Just do your user interviewing, like Elena said. And today we've actually, most of the session, we've, framed everything in terms of hopefully helping you be able to figure out how to work on these projects with your team. But, I can't end the session without saying, like, we also help teams do this at Thoughtbot. If you want your team to stay focused on core product and do AI experimentation with developers and designers and product strategists, that's a lot of exciting projects that we're working on now, and would love to chat with you about it and how we could help. But on that note, that brings us to the end of our session today. Thanks so much to the roundtable. Thank you for participating in the last 3 sessions. Thanks to everyone who has joined us live. Thank you to the people in the future who are watching this recording. And just thanks for the great discussion and the real talk, bringing some of the AI concepts to reality and how folks can actually start implementing them. This brings us to the end of what we're calling our strategic foundations section of the series. But wait, there's more. Really exciting part 2 for the series, led by Thoughtbot CEO and founder Chad Pytel, starting November 7th. He's going to lead some live stream sessions where he's going to actually start showing experienced developers or more technical product folks how to start implementing AI features. And we'll be doing some live coding that you can follow along and ask questions. And yeah, I'm excited for it. It's going to be kind of a unique opportunity to tune in with Chad. So if you want to be reminded about those sessions coming up, or even just learn more about what each of the individual ones are going to be focused on, you can go to thoughtbot.com/AI-in-focus. And so, yeah, be sure to catch that live or in the recording. But that'll be an exciting one. Don't miss it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.